Hello everybody, happy Monday and happy Easter week. Got my ears on today. Got my little bunny with me today. We'll get to see him every day this week because we're going to be doing rabbit and Easter and egg books all 4 days this week. So I hope you enjoy them. We're starting out today with the tale of Peter Rabbit, and this is a folk tale, meaning it's a story that has been passed down from generations to generations, year after year. And just to give it an indication of how long this book has been passed around, Beatrix Potter is the author, and she originally wrote this in 1902. That makes this story 118 years old, and it's still a good one. So this has been around for a very, very long time. Another thing about folk tales is that they have a moral or a lesson to them. And I will go back over that after I'm finished reading, but you should be able to learn a lesson from this story. 2 vocabulary words that I want to mention before we get started. One of them is mischief. Mischief meaning to kind of get into trouble, which goes along with the second word, which is being naughty. If you're being naughty, you are being bad. Some of you might be able to relate. Hopefully not. Anyways, Peter Rabbit gets into mischief by being naughty, so we're going to find out what's going on with him in this story. And then when we're done, we'll wrap it up, and I'll give you some reading extensions that you can find on Mayan and some video extensions that you can find on YouTube. All right, so for right now, we're going to look at the tale of Peter Rabbit, written by Beatrix Potter. Lots of pages. There we go. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dear," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce, and then some French green beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. I think he's got a tummy ache. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor. Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, "Stop, thief!" See, he knew that Peter was stealing some of his vegetables. Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on all 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. You can see the little button is caught right there in the neck. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. So Peter thought that he was done. He thought for sure he was going to be found, but then the sparrows came over and said, keep trying, don't give up. And sure enough, he was able to escape. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop up on top of Peter, but Peter wiggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a watering can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps underneath one of these flower pots. So he began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed, "Ka-choo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, so he went back to his work. You would have thought that was good news for Peter, but when he sat down to rest because he was out of breath and trembling with fright, he had not the least idea which way to go. Poor Peter was lost. He was also very wet with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He's trying to find his way out of the garden and back home. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his watering cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still. But now and then the tip of her tail twitched as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her, but he had heard about cats from his cousin, like little Benjamin Bunny. I don't think he wants to mess with a cat. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a gardening hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes. But presently, as nothing happened, he came out and he climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeked over the edge. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him, he could see the gate. So now he's got to figure out how to get from here to there without Mr. McGregor catching him. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go. Along a straight walk behind him, some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running or looked behind him till he got home to his big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. Now, fortnight is not the game, guys, the video game. Fortnight means 2 weeks. I am sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea, and she gave him a dose, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. And while Peter was tucked away in bed not feeling very well, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. The end. And there is the tale of Peter Rabbit. Now, before we started reading, I said there was a little bit of a lesson or a moral to this story. Now think about, what did Mom tell Peter? She said, don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden, right? Because she knew that his father had had some trouble there and ended up getting baked into a pie. But did Peter listen? No, he did not. So your moral to this story is to make sure that you listen to people who are maybe older and wiser than you, especially when it comes time to dangerous situations. Because if you don't, there's definitely a consequence to be paid. Now, Peter didn't run into such a serious consequences as his dad, but he was scared, he was cold, he was wet, he didn't feel when he got home, and he didn't get to have the yummy dinner that his brothers and sisters had. So make sure you listen to those people that are a little bit older and wiser than you when it comes to your safety. So there's our lesson today. All right, so we have the tale of Peter Rabbit, as I said, and you can find a couple of resources. One, if you can go on to either Mayan or to YouTube and just type in the tale of Peter Rabbit. You can get the retelling of the story on Mayan from a book. If you go do that on YouTube, there is a series of shorter videos that have Peter Rabbit's character in there. The ones that I watched were different than this story, but it all has to do with some different adventures that Peter Rabbit has, some with his brothers and sisters and some differently. But these are animated videos, and this one is just a retelling of a book. Now back to Mayan, if you just type in rabbits, you can get a lot of different nonfiction books. A couple of them you might recognize from our library. There's something about why do rabbits eat their poop? We have that one in the library. I know it sounds gross, but we have that one. But there's a couple other nonfiction ones that you might recognize. For my older kids that are listening to this, a chapter book that we have in the library is Attack of the Fluffy Bunnies. And even though that's a much longer book, that one is on Mayan. And I didn't realize this, but there is a sequel to that one. So you can get the Attack of the Fluffy Bunnies 2 is on Mayan as well if you want to read a little bit longer chapter book. And you don't have to do that all in one sitting. You can read a little bit, maybe a chapter at a time, and then come back to it. And then back onto YouTube, again, if you just search rabbits, you can also find a lot of nonfiction videos there about rabbits. So either resource, you can search the actual title, A Tale of Peter Rabbit, or rabbits, and you can find some additional resources. All right, have a good day. Happy Monday, week 2 of our e-learning, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another Easter story. Bye. Have a good day.